Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the Misfit Gamer Studios. I am your host, Vortex. That gentleman over there is your host, Kage, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, we are going through the history of Action Economy, all the way from 1st edition to 5th edition, what you were able to do during combat, what it was called, and when you were able to do it. Join us as we take this journey throughout history and see what D&D did to Action Economy. And of course, we are going to start with OD&D. Original D&D 1974.
Like you do. Love it.
Go. So what was Action Economy back in the day? Because Action Economy as we know it, main actions, bonus actions, spells.
Sure.
That's what we know about today. But oh boy, has it not been that way forever. It has changed so much. This is one of those aspects that has changed almost every single edition, trying to refine it to a...
I'm very curious because I feel like this type of action economy is, I would say it's close to the bones of an RPG. 100%.
So let's begin with original D&D, the round structure and the flow of time. How did this work? Well, combat rounds in OD&D were considered 1 minute of abstract time. Everything in this particular rule set was very abstract. A lot was meant on the DM. A lot of this was influenced by Chainmail, the previous war game.
A round was an entire minute.
Combat rounds were considered 1 minute of abstract time, simulating multiple exchanges. But
Gotcha.
You also have to understand that rounds didn't happen the way you think they did. So while a combat round was 1 minute, a turn in OD&D was equivalent to 10 minutes. Now, this wasn't combat related though. This is where we have to get our terms, because back in OD&D, a turn was more consistent with 10 minutes of doing something such as exploring a dungeon.
Okay.
So if you were to say, I'm going to take this action to explore this dungeon, and we're going to do some
10
things,
minutes exploring
10 minutes worth of that would take a turn.
Gotcha.
So whatever would take you a turn's worth, if you wanted to search for a trap.
So would you say turns are more of an out of combat terminology?
Correct, yes. But I wanted to clarify that now as while a combat round is a minute, a turn was considered 10 minutes, but it was different than in combat. This was just more of how the passage of time was compartmentalized. Now, initiative in combat in OD&D was a little bit different than you might be familiar with, because initiative was handled as a group.
Okay.
Enemies versus the party. That was it.
Okay.
One roll. It was a D6. Higher wins.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like a little bit.
I mean, it takes away a lot of the nuance of what everyone can do.
Yes.
But here's the other thing too. This wasn't just a simple initiative of who goes first. In OD&D, the initiative also counted as who won the round. So winning the initiative both meant that you resolved all your attacks and movement first. So if both sides happen to act simultaneously, let's say both sides acted 3, it was completely up to the DM to decide exactly how everything was going to fall out. So it was their level of narration and creativity to decide, based on what you said and based on what the enemies are going to do, how does that play out cinematically and for the betterment? And we'll get into that. There was no formal turn order. This was your side, the party, versus my side, the enemies you're fighting. One rolled to decide who's going to topple it, and then the rest was handled by me. Not so much in a turn order. It wasn't, or an initiative tracker like you went, then they went, then you went, then they went. It was one side's going to get to do their thing, and it was all supposed to be fluid in the narration of the DM. So
now I don't know if this is asking out of order, but if both sides were to say what they wanted to do, and then it's up to the DM to decide like how it plays out, but one side wins the round, does that mean the other side does not, actions don't go off?
No. So one side that wins the initiative round, all of you go off at once. So
Sure.
If it's a party of 6 and you all said that you were going to do something and you win the initiative, all of what you are going to do is going to happen.
Right.
Then if there's anything left, the other enemy gets to act.
Got you.
It's when you do simultaneously, when you both roll the same and you go simultaneously. That's when it's going to be the DM's decision on how to stack.
Oh, so like
actions.
if they both rolled 15s for initiative,
or in this case a 3, yeah, because it's a D6. So if you both rolled a 3 on a D6, it's the DM's decision to go, okay, you're going to take time because you're doing a spell. You said you rushed in. This enemy said they rushed in. So as you two clash, you're going to fire your arrow. This guy's going to duck and roll. That guy's going to get hit. You two are going to do this. It's literally a complete narrative. And what's funny is this is the same style that I have been talking about in recent streams about readjusting my combat style to everyone says what they do, makes their rolls ahead of time, and then I narrate how it unfolds instead of taking everybody's time with this back and forth, letting it be more of a decide what you're going to do, and instead of being based off of the nitty gritty, be based off of what everyone's going to do collectively.
Yeah.
Instead of he shot his arrow and killed him, and then he shot hit, and then he killed him with his sword. Well, then I'm going to go obviously for him. But that's not how you would all reacted.
Yeah.
You all would have chosen a target, and if you all happen to go for the same target, just because he hit him with an arrow and killed him does not mean you would have seen him drop.
Yeah.
If you were rushing him, you would have gotten there 2 seconds or a second right after the arrow hit him. You still would be in the middle of swinging your sword. You wouldn't suddenly be like, oh, that arrow's definitely killing him. I'm going to go hit the guy 10 feet away. Like, that's the thing that this kind of accomplishes. But it does take away the nuance.
I do like this. My only problem would be, like, I know how I would run it if I were a DM, but I feel like it would be hard as a player. And again, this goes back to what I've talked about before. Like, the biggest part of this game for me is everyone collectively maintaining their player and DM immersion in the game. And so I feel like the only problem is without relatively clear expectations about what you think is going to happen in a particular situation, it feels like it might feel bad in certain situations if there's no opportunity for that player to be like, hey, can I posit to you another potentially plausible way that this could play out that
I see what you're saying, but that only applies when you look at D&D from its modern perspective. Back then, you weren't your character at that level. The idea of I'm not seeing my character fulfilled didn't exist in that way.
For sure.
Me describing the combat was much more the expectation.
So
much less it was much less at your concern to be like, that's not what I think it would happen.
Sure.
It was much more about, I chose a barbarian. I know my DM's going to make me do the barbarian thing.
I totally get that. In this example that you're talking about here, would the characters, like you said, when the DM is explaining everything that happens, each character says what they're trying to do. So like if the wizard says they want to cast fireball, they can cast fireball.
They're going to cast fireball.
And then if the barbarian says, I want to cleave, and
he's going to do that. Like, and that's the whole point about how that originally happened, is the initiative roll was handled by the group D6 roll, and it was higher roll wins. But the whole point was the winning side of the initiative would get all of their actions pulled off first, then the opposing team. If it were a tie, they would both go simultaneous, and it's just up to the DM. How, when was all more specific to the cinematics. Remember, this was way back when it was the story over the mechanics.
Out of curiosity, when this contested roll happens, this initiative roll happens, is that the entire round minute?
Yes, that is the one combat round. That's why it's a minute long. So the minute long is the simulation time for everything. That's why it's considered a 1 minute combat round. Is everything the team said they were going to do, everything the party said or the enemies were going to do, all of that consists in the 1 minute that the DM narrates, and then it's the next round.
Would OD&D handle one-on-one combat differently?
Nope. Same thing.
So one turn is a minute, the other turn is a minute.
Yeah. It's an abstract concept of time. It wasn't, nothing was specific to points.
For sure.
It was just the idea that of all the posturing, the feigning, the moving, at some point over the course of a minute, whatever you wanted to happen would happen. And that's why the DM was there to judge how to talk about it.
The reason why I ask is because I feel like there would be some of these spells that would potentially take more than one turn, especially in older
we
editions.
will get into that because we haven't gotten very far yet. You allowed me to. But yes, that is something that got fixed later, but was a problem.
Okay.
Is because that, again, it all came down to how the DM felt the narration fit best. And you basically just trusted the DM to give you a good story and not worry about the nitty gritty. The case, just to kind of reiterate as well, because there was no formal turn order or initiative tracker, combat was basically fluid, favoring DM's judgment. All players acted during an initiative, so everyone on either side acted all at once, or again, narrated by the DM together. So how a combat round actually unfolds. Let's do a step-by-step guide on how to actually unfold combat. Step 1 was determine surprise. So in OD&D, the first thing you needed to do was determine if anyone was going to be surprised. Both sides would roll a d6. A roll of a 1 or 2 equaled a surprise round. Basically, kind of an extra round for people who are surprised, can't do anything. Second, you needed to declare your spells. Casters must declare their intent before initiative is thrown. So in this particular case, you roll surprise, see if anyone's surprised. Casters declare their what spells they're doing, and then basically everybody else. The main concept was you were probably going to attack. Like anybody else, is you're just going to use your attack action. So unless you wanted to specifically do something else, it was assumed you're going to
specify a target.
Yeah, you specify your target and attack, but spellcasters had to specify what they were about to do. Then at stage 3, you rolled the initiative. This is that group-based D6. Both sides are going to roll, winner takes. Then you resolve all your actions. The winning side acts fully first. This is, and in this order: melee attacks, movement, then spell resolution, as long as you weren't interrupted. Now, interruptions were, again, typically only handled if the opposing team won. So if you were a spellcaster and you lost initiative against the opposing team, your spell would not go off because they get all their attacks first. And as long as you were a target, you would essentially
get interrupted.
Yes, and you would get interrupted and your spell just would not go off.
So,
and the spell is lost when you are interrupted in OD&D.
Sure. So this is like if they even target you, if they attack you, if you are hit, whatever the case may be, your spell dies.
Yes. So
I'm here for it.
Step 5 was damage resolution. So you resolved via the D20 attack rolls and weapon damages. Typically D6s were universally across the board.
For weapon damage?
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
once everything resolved, you did the D20 for the attack rolls. So again, if the enemy team won initiative, they would just roll D20s to see if they would hit. And then if they did, they would roll their D6 for damage. And if you got damaged, then you would lose your spell. And then everybody else would get to do their attack because their attacks aren't undone by damage.
Shit.
Unless they went down. And then repeat for the next round. So that was combat. Just over and over and over. Is you say what you're going to do, roll a D6. Whoever wins gets to do all of their actions first. Otherwise, the DM has to narrate it. It's melee/movement, then spell resolution, then damage. It's clean.
I kind of want to try it.
So damage attacks. Early OD&D used a D6 universally across the board. So it doesn't matter what weapon you're using, it's a D6 of damage.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of that, but I totally understand the ideology behind it.
I get that.
But I will say, in small little note here, I was able to find that in Greyhawk Supplemental in 1975, they did introduce variable weapon damage. So even that early, they were thinking that weapons should be doing, maybe a Warhammer should do something different than, a rogue's little, pointy dagger.
A little too thick.
Just saying. So
yeah,
they did start thinking about it as early as that. Action types and terminology. So at this point, we did not have anything considered standard action. We did not have bonus action. We did not have free action. You just had attack or spell. Movement really wasn't, again, an action. It was a thing that you did if you need it, or positioning, right? But the concept of an action was just purely, are you attacking or casting a spell?
Do they have any concept of reactions or preparing something in case something specific happens?
We'll get into that here in just a second, actually.
Okay.
So the last type of action type and terminology is that we did not have any rules specifically for drinking potions, drawing weapons. All of that was basically adjudicated from the DM. All right, so moving on, getting back to topic, combat counter handling. So there were things like surprise checks, there were, as we talked about, but there were also other ones, things like morale checks and pursuit rolls, like being chased or chasing. Maps were optional and measurement was often abstract. Combat was more of, am I close enough to hit? And then also when it came to combat too, players really had to describe intent. This game back in the day was way more about actions of intent, not actions and mechanics. So it was really on to the players to describe intent clearly because timing didn't really matter. Mm-hmm. So especially if it was simultaneous, the better description you had, the more the DM worked it in.
Okay, I'm here for that. I'm here for that.
So spellcasting integration, spell lost if interrupted was a major point of this. So again, the glass cannon concept of if you chose to use a spell and you did not win initiative and you were attacked and took damage, you were not going to get your spell off, period. There was no concentration mechanic back then. There was no defining casting time beyond declaring before the round. So this was just straight, if you declared that spell going off, that spell was going to go off unless you took damage.
Was there theoretically any restrictions to spells? Like, were there certain spells that are specifically out of combat spells that you couldn't cast during combat?
There might have been, but not primarily, no. But not a lot. Most of this, I mean, like healing spells, but primarily this was all going to be combat-based for OD&D. And then casters could not move or take other actions while casting. All right, so now moving on to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition from 1977. Round structure and flow of time. Combat rounds were still 1 minute.
Okay.
Each round, however, was now broken into 10 segments of 6 seconds each.
So round is a minute and a segment is 6 seconds?
Correct.
And there are 10 segments.
10 segments per round. So each round had 10 segments. Each combat round was 1 minute. Initiative is rolled per side as a group with a d6 or per individual at the DM's discretion. So the DMG basically gave the DM options on whether or not you treat both sides as one, or if everybody gets to individualize their initiative.
Okay.
Casting time and weapon speeds were introduced, measured in segments, determining when in a round specific actions would resolve. So now it's no longer on the DM to adjudicate specifically where each little thing would happen. It is now more specific to the design of the weapon or the spell. So you would roll a d6. Your actions for that round, your turn for that round, would start on one of the first 6 segments. And then whatever you were using may add time to that, may add segments. So maybe you go off in segment 3, but your weapon or spell has 2 segments of time. So your effect won't go off until segment 5. Now, if you're attacking another spellcaster and their segment is number 6, you're going to hit them before their spell goes off, thus having a chance to, say, interrupt them. Whereas if theirs goes off at 4, yours doesn't go off till 5, even though you started at 3, you know what I mean? Theirs would go off first, maybe counteracting yours. So that's where this kind of gave that granularity of timing matter.
Was there allowances to, if I wanted to make sure my spell goes off after somebody in my party, could I like wait until theirs goes
basically
declared?
ready in action?
Kind of.
I don't think readied actions were introduced until...
Got you. Not until 2nd edition.
Yeah, no readied actions just yet.
Okay.
Action types and terminology, still no formalized action types. So it wasn't action, bonus action, none of that just yet. It was still what you were doing.
Just what are you trying to do?
So instead, without action types, timing was managed through weapon speed factors and casting time in segments.
Sure. Was the movement used the same way as it was in OD&D? Like you just moved according to whether you needed to or not?
It was basically on an as needed basis. And then each segment resolved actions in order of initiative plus their modifier. So you had some modifiers, but basically initiative now happened in that order. So still the concept of collectively everything happens all at once and everyone rolls for it, but now there's just a more structured order of now we all know from the get-go who's gonna, what actions are gonna go off, instead of it just being up to the DM to just figure it out right then and there. So a little bit easier for the DM, also a little bit more everybody kind of gets to have their hand in it.
Okay.
So another example of the initiative is like if you rolled a 3, but you had a casting time of 2, your spell won't resolve until segment 5. So you have to keep that in mind when it comes to other people and what they are doing.
Yeah.
So combat handling, or the encounter handling, so very similar to before, but now we have a few extra specialties. Surprise was still handled the same way, d6 roll on a 1 or a 2, you are surprised. Some monsters surprised on a 1 to a 3 or a 1 only, so it was kind of dependent. They started playing around with surprise, not as universal.
Sure.
Morale was now more codified. It was a little bit more encouraged. NPCs and monsters had to make morale checks to avoid fleeing.
Okay.
So if they took too much damage, if they're, if
allies
die, yeah. So there was a lot of reasons why you could adjust that. You got reaction adjustments. So some creatures reacted based on alignment or charisma of the party.
Interesting.
With spellcasting integration, you still had to declare your spells before the initiative was rolled. So it was still I am going to do this and I'm burning this spell regardless. Interrupted if the caster did take damage before the spell resolved, but now instead of it being a whether or not you won initiative, it's strictly on whether or not you took damage before your segment time was up.
Sure.
And again, I feel like that gave a lot more tacticalness to the mage on being able to decide what spells to cast based on the casting time, instead of just purely, I hope we win initiative.
Yeah. A lot more flexibility.
Damage or interruption during any part of the casting time results in loss of the spell. So that is straight from the DMG. Any amount of damage at all was immediate loss. Wasn't just, oh, it didn't go off, that's gone. Like, you burnt it up even though it didn't go off. So examples in gameplay. So let's say that the cleric declares hold person. It has a casting time of 5 segments.
Okay.
Party wins the initiative with the 4. Cleric spell will resolve in segment 9. So this is in the case of you're still using team. Remember, it's on the DM's choice whether you use team-based or individual. But this case, let's say that the cleric rolls a 4. But the spell will not go off for 5 segments. That means that the cleric spell will not resolve until segment 9.
Okay.
Now, the enemy wizard had an initiative of 5, so technically started after this wizard, but cast Magic Missile, which only has a casting time of 1 segment. So Magic Missile will go off in segment 6, while the party's wizard will not go off until segment 9. In that particular case, Magic Missile will hit on segment 6 because it's auto hit, and it will automatically cancel the cleric holds person because the cleric took damage. That hold person will not go off anymore.
That sucks.
Very much sucks.
But that's exactly what you got to do.
All right, so round structure and time flow for AD&D 2nd edition, published in 1989. One round was still considered 1 minute. We are still using segments, 10 per round, 6 segments per segment, or 6 seconds per segment, 10 segments per round, 1 round per minute.
Okay.
Initiative was rolled each round. This is where we finally get the introduction of dynamic initiative. Favorite and a hill I will die on. Dynamic initiative is always better.
Each round or each segment?
Each round. Everyone gets to go in a different order every time. Really playing into the idea of as the battle progresses, you are thinking and reacting and feeling differently. And that's my favorite. This is that hill I will die on, is dynamic initiative is the better of the two. Like, I don't like 5Es where if I'm 7th in line, I'm always 7th in line for the rest of the battle. That's not how the flow of combat works.
I will say, I do agree that's not how the flow of combat works. I will also say, for me as a player, it doesn't feel as bad because after round 1, it kind of doesn't matter. It's just a circle.
And that's what I like about dynamic initiative, is the idea that you can use it to your advantage.
Sure.
But I also think back then there was just more things that took more advantage of your place in initiative. Whereas now, like you said, as long as someone still has health, it doesn't really matter. But again, initiative was dynamic for the first time. It was a D10 per character now. So so instead of being a D6 plus your modifiers of the weapon or the spell, it's just you were now in that position. But you still had segments, so spells still did have segment time, but you could just be pure last.
So, but would it still go off this round? I rolled a 9 and I wanted to cast a spell that takes 5 segments to go off. Would it go off next round or will it go off at the end of the round?
It will go off still at the end of the round.
So if only one segment has passed, it's still going to go off.
It would still go off at the end. Yeah, it would still go off at the end of the round, just because it's still your action of that round. So being last just meant you were last.
And it meant it was damn near impossible for anyone to interrupt me.
Pretty much,
and lose my spell. So I can almost guarantee if I was the wizard and I was casting in the last place of initiative, no one's going to interrupt my spell.
True.
Interesting. Okay.
But you still had modifiers from spells, weapons, and actions, which would affect your result. So you could get negatives to your, your initiative to make you better in the initiative, or you can get things that would cost you time. Combat counter and handling. Surprise, morale, and reaction rolls were finally clarified in the core rules. So now we actually had more about how surprise worked. It wasn't just a base roll. There was actually like mechanics, you getting snuck up on, were you asleep? The concept of why did you get surprised, not just you were surprised.
Got you. Okay.
Morale was a lot more codified. So enemies, groups had much more reasons to have morale. I mean, if someone has a leader and you kill the leader first, that's going to affect the people who, what are they going to do? Let's see here. Thaco. So to hit armor class 0 replaces the original attack tables. Probably one of the most controversial aspects of all in D&D's rule sets ever. Thaco is probably the one that rubs the most people the wrong way.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people complain about it, but I mean, it's like anything else. Once you figure it out, it's really not that bad.
Everyone tries to say it doesn't make any sense. It is quite literally you roll a d20. Subtract that result from your Thaco. So if your to hit 0 is a 10 and you roll a 5, you minus that from your Thaco, and that's the AC that you hit. That's it. Roll, subtract, that's the AC you hit. If you rolled an 18, you subtract that from 10.
So different than rolling and adding any bonuses you have.
Oh, it's so different than adding bonuses.
Seeing I hit that AC.
Exactly, because it's quite literally just that. If you rolled an 18 and your Thaco was a 10, you hit an AC of -8. It was just different, and I know people like big number go up, awesome. I will say though that 2nd edition was also the first attempt for them to, not their first attempt. 2nd edition was their biggest step away from wartime game. It was the biggest step that they've done away from large group and like team versus team, and really stepped into the individualized character play, which I think again is worth note, because even in 1st edition, it was still more influenced by wartime gaming, right? They still had roll tables. Yeah. This is the first time that every weapon, every character did their own thing, and everything was calculated per that person and per their actions, instead of this larger narrative-based outcome. So I definitely always like to note that 2nd edition was really that first introduction into AD&D being a individual player game instead of a team game.
I feel that.
All right. So spell casting integrations. Spell list had segment-based casting time still. So we were still in the segments.
Okay.
Casting time can be interrupted by damage, same as the first edition, but it did begin the shift towards a per round resolution, and no longer the spells are the full round or the full minute. And then, so an example of the gameplay, so the wizard would begin casting web with a casting time of 2. The initiative rolled individually, so they rolled a 4. So they, with a 2 segment time, they would cast their spell in segment 6. Now, if an enemy fighter had an initiative of 5 and went to go after the wizard, if they would hit the wizard in segment 5, the spell would fail. But if the fighter hit the wizard in, say, segment 3, nothing would happen because he hasn't started casting it yet.
Right.
So he would only do the damage, but then the wizard would still get his opportunity to cast a spell.
Oh,
remember, because he had to start. Because again, if the wizard is on initiative 4 but gets attacked in initiative 3, the wizard hasn't started their turn yet. There is no interruption. It's only if they get attacked after their initiative begins and the spell starts.
So in older editions, they would not lose the spell slot, but they also wouldn't get to do anything.
Yeah, in the older editions, if the enemy team won the initiative and they got damaged, it was just purely because it was just assumed they hit first. All right, so moving on to 3rd edition and 3.5. So 3rd edition, round structure and flow of time. Rounds were now reduced to 6 seconds.
Round is 6 seconds.
The round is no longer a combat round of a minute. It is now, one round is 6 seconds. Each character's turn was the 6-second slot within that round. So everybody was acting simultaneously through that 6 seconds. Your turn was just what you were doing during that 6 seconds. Initiative was tracked with a d20 plus your dexterity modifier, tracked in round order.
That's kind of what it is now.
Let's see here. So action types and terminology. So now we get some final understanding about what the fuck we're doing. First off, we get standard action.
Hey.
Something like an attack, casting a spell, or activating an ability. This is a considered standard action now. We have a codified word for it. We have now a codified word for move action. This is moving up to speed, drawing a weapon, or standing up. This is all part of your move action.
You took movement to stand up, and it took movement to draw a weapon. I kind of like that.
You had what was called a full round action. So this would be something like a charge.
Okay, so
a full attack. So if you had multi-attack, a full attack would be all of your attacks. If you had the chance to do multi-attack, or a coup de grace attack.
Oh,
these were all considered full round attacks.
Okay.
Free actions, speaking, dropping items, shouting. We had swift actions.
Okay.
Swift actions, you got 1 per turn. These are things like minor abilities such as divine favor. Then you also got immediate actions. You got 1 per round.
Immediate action and a swift act.
1 per turn versus 1 per round. The immediate action were triggered off turn. Something like Featherfall would be considered something that you would be able to trigger off turn.
Oh, so it's like their version of a reaction.
Exactly. Immediate action is a reaction. The swift action,
it's like a bonus action.
Kind of more like a bonus action. Swift actions is once per turn, so it happens on your 6 sets every round. So it's once per round. An immediate action happens off turn.
Interesting. So yeah, I do like that concept a little bit.
So this economy allowed for 1 standard action plus 1 move action, or 1 full round action, and swift intermediate actions are additive to that because they're like the bonus actions. But yeah, you can either do a standard and a move or 1 full round action. That's it.
I'm not gonna lie, I really like the concept of stealing movement to draw weapons and stuff like that, because I want my players to be able to like do that kind of stuff if you want to like draw, but like I don't want it to be free. But I feel like charging like a whole action feels like
that's why it typically for me will cost like an attack action. Basically, like if you have 1 weapon and you want to draw a different weapon, like it's going to cost 1 of those action economies. It's going to cost 1 of those attack actions.
Sure.
So let's look at combat handling. So the combat grid finally became standardized. So it wasn't until 3rd edition that we finally got the the squares that we, and then eventually the hexes that are, obviously superior. But this is it, that we got the 5-foot square. The first official combat grid was finalized here. So we got the 5-foot squares, and this is also where they started introducing things like reach, flanking, and opportunity of attacks, because they all depended specifically on spatial positioning. The opportunity attacks occurred first when someone left your threatening square, so moved out of combat. Spell casting was provoked an opportunity attack if you were within melee range.
Yes.
And using ranged weapons while in melee range gave an opportunity attack. So
Gotcha.
right out the gate, when they decided opportunity attacks, these were the first three things they knew out the gate were always going to be
Now
targets.
this is in 3rd edition.
Yes.
So does it say what action economy it used to make an opportunity attack? Was it a swift action?
So opportunity attack would have probably been an immediate action because it's not on your turn, because it's triggered off turn. So that would have been an immediate action.
Okay.
In order to pull that off. And they did add something called defensive casting. It did require a concentration check, but it allowed you to safely cast a spell within melee range and not provoke an opportunity attack. So you took a concentration check over an attack. All right, so spell casting integration. Spells generally would require a standard action. Unless otherwise specified, it was pretty much standardized. They were going to take standard actions. There were occasional full round spells, such as summon monster.
Okay.
So, and then of course you got the concentration skill to maintain casting amid damage. So Player's Handbook introduced, if you fail the constitution check, the spell is lost. So this is the first time you didn't auto lose your spell if you were attacked and took damage. This was the first time interruption was not automatic.
Gotcha.
And this is where we started getting concentration checks. So I love that. I think that's really cool. And then an example in this. So let's say a wizard has an initiative of 14. On turn, they choose the standard action Scorching Ray. They'll move 10 feet with the move action. They drop their wand with a free action. And then enemy fires arrow before the next turn. Wizard uses the immediate action shield and protects themselves.
I like that.
Yep. All right. Are we ready for 4th? We're almost done, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hurry up and get through 4th edition because no one actually cares about 4th edition, released in 2008.
We need a graphic for 4th edition, special.
Nobody likes 4th edition. So round structure and time flow. Rounds remained at 6 seconds, keeping with 3E. They didn't change that. I know, shocker. Each character got 1 turn per round. So again, very similar. Everyone's acting within the same 6 seconds. You all have that same pocket of time. Initiative was a D20 plus your dexterity modifier and fixed order for the whole combat. So again, this is not dynamic initiative. They said once you roll, that's it. You keep that number from here on out. They're the ones that screwed it up.
How dare you, 4th edition?
Initiative was the D20 plus dexterity modifier, and it was fixed for the whole combat. So unique to 4E, the rules assume cinematic simultaneity, where effects happen during the same 6 seconds, even if resolved sequentially. The biggest difference between the previous editions and 4th editions is the assumption was more on the visual. So action types and terminology, which we finally got a lot more structure. So standard actions remained. We have primary actions like attacks, casting spells, using one of your powers. Your move actions, you had mood, you had stand up. You also, in addition from move and stand up, now you had something called shift, was being able to move 5 feet only.
I remember this.
And this was basically before we had disengage, because it was the one thing you could do without provoking opportunity attack.
Yeah.
So it was the first disengage.
Yes.
Now was the first time we had minor actions mentioned. These are things like drawing weapons, activating items, and some of your class powers. This is where we took it away from the movement and made it its own type of action. You also, things like free actions were like quick, no cost activities. So shouting, pointing, dropping something maybe.
Yeah.
And then you also had immediate interrupts. So these things resolved before a trigger, and then you had immediate reactions that they resolve after a trigger. And you could downgrade actions. Standard could become a move action, a move became a minor, but not reverse. It was 4th edition who introduced the official cannibalization.
I will say that's something that I like. I do like being able to say, hey, I'm not going to spend this part of my action doing this. I would like to spend it doing this. Similar to the idea of a full action, or what 3rd edition called, like, I'm going to take my entire turn to do this bigger thing. Like,
again, these things are great. I love the idea of putting these things in their own separate categories.
Sure.
I'm actually surprised. I thought it was 3.5 that did the downgrade. So I'm glad I have it in the notes because you asked.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was 4th edition that did that allowed the official downgrade. 4th edition was the first to introduce the action point, what would later become the action surge. The action point, once per encounter, you were able to take an extra standard action on your turn by spending an action point.
Oh, that's right.
So kind of similar to an action surge, but everybody got one. Moving into combat handling. So this was designed around the tactical grid combat and powers with defined effects. So you talked about this before, the encounters, the dailies, the at-wills, and this was specifically designed around the new combat grid that 3rd edition had just done. So this was very much structured on having minis or having some sort of gamepad, very much like a video game. Everything was visual. The encounter was basically setup, initiative, and structured turns. Powers were explicitly tagged by certain types of uses. So you had at will, you had encounters, you had daily. These were limiters on how often that these powers could happen. You also had action types and targeting area. So single target, AoE,
Right.
as well as the action type that it actually was, whether it was a standard action or, sometimes minor. Also, something else that was unique to 4E for combat was roles. So they leaned heavily into everyone leaning into or playing their roles. So you had defenders, controllers, strikers, and leaders actually influenced more about your playstyle and your character build than even your class did. Like it was really designed for you to play and cover a section of the party, right? Like being a healer meant being a healer. Being a tank meant being a tank, not just having the guy with the most armor.
Right.
Like, so with spellcasting integrations, the powers were really where it was at for wizards and other classes. Like spells really got replaced with powers. It's just the powers could do different things on a spell level. So obviously you had each power clearly defined. You had action types, you had usage frequency, area and effect, and then conditions imposed. No spell slots or advancing system prep. This was basically just you had it and you just used it as you could at will or daily. Super streamlined, super simple. Not my favorite, but was one of the easiest to get into.
Fair.
And then having, so an example of this in gameplay, say a wizard has an initiative of 17. So on their turn, they'll use Thunder Wave, which is a standard action. It has an area burst of 3 push, and it pushes enemies. Then they move 1 square using shift for their move action, so they're not going to have an opportunity attack. But then they're also going to use Magic Hand, which is a minor action to interact with a lever. So so even though before this, in every edition before this, you could not cast more than 1 spell in a turn. This was one of the first times that they were like, hey, if a spell wasn't on the same level, you can cast multiple spells. You can cast a daily and an at will, as long as they weren't both standard. So it was the first time you can actually cast more than 1 spell on a turn.
Interesting.
As long as they weren't standard actions.
Okay.
And then, so let's go, I guess, into 5th edition. That was it. So now we're into 5th edition. I mean, this is only going to be 5th edition for 14 because, again, I lost my 2024 book
For sure.
access.
That's super lame, yeah.
So we're just going to go really quickly, but everyone knows 5E from 2014. The structure and time flow rounds were 6 seconds, and each character takes 1 turn. Within that 6 seconds, of course, everyone's sharing initiative, or not initiative, everyone's sharing the same time frame in the round.
Right.
Initiative was a d20 with your dex modifier. Turns resolved in initiative order repeated each round. So no dynamic initiative. What you roll is what you roll. And movement can be split around other actions for the first time. So you can move, attack, then move. Whereas everywhere else, moves were more about positioning than they were about tactical use. Very unique to 5th edition. But again, something I think should be adopted to any edition you play. So I have that in High Point.
For sure.
Action types and terminology. So we have your action. So we got rid of standard and now it's just action.
Got you.
Your action can be attack, cast a spell, dash, disengage, dodge, help, hide, ready, or search. These are all actions. Bonus actions. These things were gained from class features, spells, or feats. Something like cunning action, healing word. A fun note, bonus actions were not granted freely. Bonus actions officially by the core rulebooks were not an official action. You did not have in your arsenal by default an action, a movement, and a bonus action. By default, you had your action, your movement, and then things could tell you get a bonus.
Interesting.
It is truthfully a bonus action. It is not part of your repertoire. You do not get to.
It's a very interesting way to think about it. I think that understanding it that way makes a lot more sense when things like action search happen, because a lot of people for a while were trying to argue, I should get a whole nother turn, which is an action, bonus action, and all this other stuff.
Your movement, you can move up to speed and it can be split. Reactions, you do get 1 per turn on another's turn, or 1 per round on someone else's turn. So this was the replacement of the immediate action, the triggered off turn.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had free object interaction. So now drawing, sheathing weapons, opening doors, things of that sort, lighting a torch were now just considered a free object interaction. So these things were codified as free actions.
Now, from my understanding is you only get 1 free action.
Yep. So if you want to draw or sheathe the sword or open a door, it's a
free action, but you can only do it once.
Exactly. Everything, you can only do 1 of these if you do them. I think that having the codification that each of these can only be done once per round, but you don't get each of these once per round.
Right.
Combat encounter handling. So interesting enough, 5th edition had this really interesting thing where starting out, they tried to go back and encourage more theater of the mind. early on, a lot of like when they first brought back 5th edition in 2014, while they did support grid play, a lot of the rules were like the way that it read, a lot of it really was trying to go back to the origins of theater of the mind, which is funny because as it grew, it played more, it went the opposite direction. As they continued to get the supplementals and expand it, they realized that people had grown accustomed to a lot of the physical gameplay. A lot of people came to get used to the minis and used to the tabletop. So it is kind of funny that I would not say that today about 5th edition, but it did try to rekindle the theater of the mind crowd.
Okay.
Opportunity attacks trigger when a creature leaves your reach, unless you use disengage. So that was one of the bigger aspects of that. And readied actions. So action plus a trigger turns basically turns a action into a reaction when a certain trigger is met. So 5th edition was the first one to introduce readied action. All right, so spellcasting integration. We're almost done here. So most spells are actionable casting. So of course they're going to be taking your full action. Very few of them will have anything less than that. Some like Healing Word are a bonus action, and then you can even get some like Counterspell and Shield, which are a react. Yes. So there are variances, but the mass majority of them going to cost you your action. And then concentration, you can maintain only one concentration spell at a time. So 5th edition leaned into that concentration mechanic we talked about earlier and said, hey, why not make that a thing for spells? Instead of concentration check with just when you take damage, what about a concentration for like the general concept of the spell? And then of course, taking damage while you're concentrating equals a constitution saving throw to maintain the spell. So it's more of they took the same constitution mechanic that we saw introduced earlier, and then they really leaned into it and said some spells are just going to require.
I'm curious if any spells like in earlier editions had like maintained concentration, like spells that like lasted long periods of time.
They just lasted their time frame. And it was only when the first time we got it introduced, because before was when you took damage, it was automatically interrupted. Then the first time they introduced the concentration mechanic was only when you took damage, you had to just concentrate on not losing your interrupt.
Continuing to cast the spell.
Continuing to cast it, but the spell, once it went off, would still last 10 minutes, a minute, however long the spell was going to cast.
Down, it doesn't matter.
Correct. Spells kept on going.
Interesting.
So that's why 5th edition said, hey, we like this mechanic, but let's expand that to spells that would actually make sense that you would have to like maintain, which I'm not against.
I'm not either.
All right, so in an example of this, I don't really give it, I think everyone has an example, but you know, if you have like a bard wins an initiative at 18, they can use a bonus action to do Healing Word on an ally within 30 feet. They can use their action of Vicious Mockery on a goblin, and then they can move 10 feet to get behind cover, much more tactical in their uses. And then later down the road, the goblin will try to target them, but of course they weren't able to find them because they, you know, were in cover. So they went for a different ally, but the bard would use their cutting words as a reaction to reduce their damage. So this is a way that you can just, you know, highlight all of that. So a couple highlights here for key innovations. OD&D introduced initiative and abstract combat, but they did not have any formal action types or timing. First edition, segments were introduced, casting times and weapon speeds also integrated with what segments you would attack. Often confusing interaction rules because what happens when two people have different interactions ended up on the same segment. 2E introduced THAC0 and gave clearer initiative and morale rules. It retained the segment confusion because it lacked clear action economy still. Third edition, we got standard move, full, swift, and immediate actions, and we also got grid combat introductions. Segments still reigned supreme, but we still had group initiative.
Yep.
Wasn't until 4th edition when we got minor actions, immediate interrupts, and powers as a combat structure, and they got rid of spell slots and the Vancian system in favor of the specialty powers. And again, I misspoke on 3rd edition. They got rid of segments and group initiative for individualized initiative.
Gotcha.
Missaid that.
That's right. They were the first ones to use the D20 and the dexterity.
Yep. And then 5th edition, unified the actions, bonus actions, reaction system. We got 3 movement splits between your action economy, and we got simplified casting times. We did lose the more complex action stacking and the granular tactics of back and forth, but as you can see, we still get quite a bit of opportunities. And that's it. That is the history of action economy. I'm curious to know if there was anything that y'all didn't know, anything that you guys were surprised about today. Because yeah, there's been quite a lot of changes out there. But yeah, there you go. There was the history of action economy from 1st to 5th edition. That was a lot of fun. It's fascinating to see again the problems they ran into, the solutions they came up with, and the constant grind to make a better playing experience.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining us today on the exciting adventure of the history of action economy, 1st through 5th. I hope you enjoyed everything that you saw today. Let us know in the comments what you were surprised about. Did you know any of these things? Was anything really surprising to you? Did you not know about any of this stuff? Was there anything that kind of blew your mind? Or is there any old rules that you're now going to try to bring into your new game? I'd really like to know what you're going to try to do. Let us know in the comments, like and subscribe if you like this video. Hope to see you guys in the future. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Cheers.
This is my friends.